Hi, my name is Lila, and this is Ask Me Anything, Vedic Astrology. Today we're going over a mystery chart. Someone so famous you'd have to be living under a rock to not know who they are. The first person to guess correctly who this individual is will receive a free 1/2 hour astrology reading from yours truly. Put your best guess in the comments below, and we'll reveal the identity next week in the next video. Today's individual is a female, born under the rising sign of Sagittarius, the 9th house of the zodiac. That means the constellation of Sagittarius was rising on the eastern horizon at the time of her birth. This is not to be confused with Western astrology's sun sign, which changes from month to month. Rising signs in Vedic astrology change approximately every 2 hours. Sagittarius rising in the ascendant gives this individual a magnificent personality and a very pleasant presence. Sagittarians are diplomatic in nature, believe in hard work and God, and most notably are very blessed with the ability to maintain composure and are also cautious. Before going further, I'd like to point out that this individual was born, if you see here, the ascendant is at 28.37 degrees. This makes 28.37 what we call the most effective point, or what we call the MEP of the chart. This means any planet within 5 degrees plus or minus from 28.37 has increased strength. In this chart, we have 4 planets on the most effective point. We have Mars, 28.02. We have Jupiter, 29.41. And we have Saturn, 1.37. As every house has 30 degrees, 1.37 is within 5 degrees of the 28.37 point. We also have 2 malefic planets, Rahu and Ketu. Here's Ketu, 27.17, Rahu, 27.17. They are causing afflictions. They're on the most effective point of the chart. So the life of this individual would have many and very pronounced highs and lows, with the highs outweighing the lows. Right now I'm going to go over the significations of the 12 houses, or what we call bhavas, of the zodiac. For those already familiar with these houses, you may want to skip ahead just a few minutes. This is the first house. The first house indicates self, prosperity, reputation. Second house, we have status, money in the bank, and the continuity of family life. Third house is house of entrepreneurial ventures, self-efforts, pulling oneself up by one's own bootstraps. It is also the house of the arms, because when you get ahead in life, when you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, you're using your arms. Here we have the 4th house. The 4th house is the house of domestic peace and happiness, and the house of the physical home. Here we have the 5th house. 5th house indicates romance, children, speculative investments. And these all seem so very different. Children, speculative investments, romance. But actually they're very similar. They're all a crapshoot. You really don't know what you're going to get with any of those. They're all speculations. It is also the house of wisdom. The 6th house is what we call a malefic house. It's a Dustana house. It's one of the houses that causes problems. This house is the house of fire, theft, vandalism. It's the house of dis-ease, including disease, war, litigation, violence. Here we go on to the 7th house. The 7th house is the house of the other. You see, this is the house of the self. The house of the other is directly opposite the house of the self. So this would be relationships, business relationships, romantic relationships, marriage. It's the house of the other. We go on to the 8th house, is the house of easy boons and gains. as opposed to earned income. It is the house of inheritances, the house of windfalls, the house of insurance settlements, and it is also the house of the marital bond. The ninth house is the house of father, spiritual preceptor, good luck, and good fortune. 10th house is the house of career, the house of karma. It's the house of what people see us as. If you see someone dressed up in a policeman's uniform, you assume they are a policeman. Dressed up as a nurse, you assume they're a nurse. This is what people see us as, the house of career. Next, we have the 11th house. The 11th house is the house of earned income. It is also the house of friends. This is the 12th house. The 12th house is the house of unwanted expenses, losses, imprisonment, hospitalization. In ancient times, it was the house of exile, where they sent you when they didn't want you anymore. Therefore, in modern times, hospitals, prisons, it's a house of loss, house of financial loss. This is not a good house. It is one of the malefic houses. Our malefic houses are the 8th house, the 12th house, and the 6th house. Although the 8th house is the house of boons and gains, it is also the house of death and death-like experiences, accidents, and very strong obstructions. If the owner of the 8th house is poorly placed, or if the 8th house is afflicted, it brings out the negative tendencies of the 8th house. If the owner of the 8th house is well placed, it brings out the positive aspects of that house. We will go on. We will see more about that later. Now, getting back to the chart, this individual, Sagittarius, the 9th house of the zodiac, is in the 1st house, owned by Jupiter. Jupiter is a diplomatic and expansive planet. The 1st house indicates personality, health, longevity, prosperity, and Jupiter is the natural significator for husband, judgment, children. It is placed, Jupiter, this is Jupiter here, in the 2nd house of bank account, continuity of family life, and status. This connects the 1st house of one's very self and also prosperity with the 2nd house of bank account, continuity of family life, and status. It is a good placement. Now, along with Jupiter, as we see here, we have Mars. Mars is placed in the 2nd house, family life, bank account, and status. Mars owns Aries. Aries is here. Aries is the first. See that little one? It's the 1st house of the zodiac. First sign of the zodiac. This is the 5th house. It represents speculative investments, children, and wisdom, this house. In this chart, Mars is exalted. See, it's placed in the 2nd house, and we can see it is placed in the 10th sign of the zodiac. 10th sign of the zodiac is Capricorn. Mars is always exalted in Capricorn. This gives Mars further strength. Because Mars and Jupiter are conjunct, you see one is at 2802, the other is at 2941. They're very, very close. They're within 5 degrees. These two planets have a strong and very positive effect on one another. One would expect this person to have wealth, long life, and money from speculation, and to own vast real estate, as Mars is also a natural indicator of real estate. This real estate would ascend in value as not only is Mars exalted, but again it's placed in the house of bank account. This is very propitious. Mars is a male planet, and it owns again the 5th house of children. So it bestows male children. Jupiter, which represents the person's very self, is on the most effective point of the 2nd house of bank account. This combination can give one lucky windfalls through one's own efforts. And as Mars, commander-in-chief of the planetary cabinet, is conjunct Jupiter, her very self, this would give the individual inherent qualities of commander-in-chief. One caveat here is that Jupiter is debilitated, weakening its significations. Women with a debilitated Jupiter often end up with men who are not good husband material and, quite frankly, who just don't stick around. A debilitated planet in the second house also gives rise to marital discord. Again, Mars owning Aries, the fifth house of investments and children, placed in the second house of status and bank account, on the most effective point again, and exalted, would bestow children who have status in life, and it bestows herself with gains from investments. Mars also grants her great administrative skills, as Mars is the commander-in-chief of the planetary cabinet, both exalted and well-placed on the most effective point. Mars aspects 4, 7, and 8 houses away when it's placed on the most effective point. So it would be casting its blessings 4 houses away, 1, 2, 3, 4, on the 5th house, its own house of speculative investments. This is very propitious. It would be casting an aspect on the 8th house of easy boons and gains. So it connects speculative investments with easy boons and gains. And it also aspects the 9th house of the father. This would give her a father who is exceptionally well-seated financially. This particular placement of Mars also gives the person a meteoric rise in career. Next in line we have the Sun. Here's the Sun. Sun owns Leo. Leo is the king of the planetary cabinet, and it is seated in its house of exaltation, another exalted planet. Sun is exalted in Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, in the house of speculative investments in children. This exaltation makes the Sun exceptionally strong. In this chart, the Sun here owns the 9th house of good luck, father, and general good fortune. So it brings those energies right here into the house of children and speculative investments. One is fortunate in life and practices spiritual principles under the able guidance of one's father and spiritual preceptor. A strong and well-placed Sun confers name, fame, and evolution on the soul. It confers handsome gains on investments. Owner of the 9th house in the 5th. The Sun rules the financial strength of the father. Father is here, which in this chart would be very significant, the financial strength of the father. We'll go on to Venus now. Venus owns Libra. Libra is the 7th house of the zodiac, and it occupies the 11th house here of earned income and friends. Venus is seated in the 3rd house. In this chart, that is Aquarius, and Aquarius is owned by Saturn. This strong Venus would bless the native with affluence and luxuries. Such individuals are often connected with the media as they have mass appeal, because Saturn, the owner of the 3rd house, is Aquarius, 11th sign of the zodiac, seated in the 3rd house. That's owned by Saturn. Venus is seated here, and Saturn represents the masses. So she would have gains from masses who would count her as their friend. Next up we have Mercury. Now Mercury owns Virgo. It owns the 10th house of career and is placed in Pisces. Mercury's over here. 12th house of the zodiac is Pisces. This is the 4th house of domestic peace and happiness. It also indicates the physical home. But one caveat here is that Mercury is weak because it's debilitated in Pisces. In this case, it would signify many ups and downs in one's life, career, and one suffers on account of the male child. Again, Mercury owns Virgo. In this chart, the 10th house of career, Mercury is a natural significator for business and communications. Its placement in the 4th house of home and real estate connects business, communications, and career with the home. So this person may hold business meetings at home and end up holding significant real estate in conjunction with the career. However, there may be problems with communications in the family, as the 4th house of domestic peace and happiness has this debilitated Mercury inside of it. That would significate debilitated communications. Next we have Moon, which is the queen of the planetary cabinet. Moon is seated in the tricky 8th house in this chart. I say tricky because the 8th house is the house of easy gains, unearned income, windfalls, insurance settlements, inheritances, longevity, and the marital bond. If well placed and unafflicted, it confers blessings. When badly placed, it can portend strong obstructions, death, severe setbacks, critical illnesses, and life sufferings. In this chart, the royal moon is placed in its own sign of Cancer, so it's happy and comfortable in its own home, bestowing enormous blessings in the native. This individual would have substantial inheritance, easy gains, long life, winnings in lottery and gambling-like efforts, and a very well-established father. She'd have long life to see the sun. This house is longevity, and a long marriage, because this is also the house of marital bond. Moon being so very well placed would bring out its feminine, nurturing, gentle, and considerate nature. Moon is also a natural significator for fame, fortune, and public regard, which would be significant in this chart, again due to Moon being in its own sign. It's also at 19 degrees, which gives it extra strength. Any planet placed between 10 and 20 degrees, I can't even write with this thing, gives it extra strength. So this Moon is very, very, very well placed and blesses the individual. She would not have to strive to acquire status. With the owner of the 8th house in its own sign, people would just give things to her. These individuals effortlessly acquire unearned boons and gains. The sun and the moon placement here are extraordinary, and I'll tell you why. There are only 8 days per year when both Moon, the queen of the planetary cabinet, and the sun, king of the planetary cabinet, are both either in their own sign or exalted. And on those 8 days, they are strong in degrees only 1/3 of the time. So statistically, that means only 2 out of every 300 people would have this kind of strong planetary blessing. Now, one contrary indication we have in this chart is a woman with a long-lasting marriage. We have Moon in its own sign of marital bond, but indications of a husband who doesn't stick around. Jupiter, natural significator for husband, debilitated. So which is it? I once asked my professor, David Hawthorne, this same question when I saw diametrically opposed indications in a chart. So what happens? Which one occurs? Or do they cancel each other out? He replied, both. Both happen. So we can assume this individual has a long-lasting marriage with a husband who behaves inappropriately and who may step out. But as the husband planet, Jupiter, is seated smack dab in the house of continuity of family life, I'd say he stays in the family, causing discord along the way, as Jupiter is, after all, debilitated. And any debilitated planet in the 2nd house gives rise to marital discord. The placement of Saturn, owner of the 3rd house, see, Saturn owns the 3rd house here. It owns Aquarius. Aquarius in this chart is the 3rd house. And Saturn is placed in the 12th. This is the house of losses. So this, we can surmise this person would not make a good entrepreneur. It indicates strong obstructions and sudden setbacks in one's own initiatives. But as Saturn represents the masses, And naturally, it just represents the masses, that planet. And the 12th house is also the house of life overseas. I would say this individual may put a good degree of her efforts into the masses overseas. It owns the house of one's own self-efforts, seated in the house of losses and life overseas. So while she would make a good entrepreneur, again, she may put efforts into the masses overseas. Now, if you look carefully at this chart, Saturn does aspect the 11th house of income and on the most effective point. Saturn is at 1.37. Our most effective point is at 28.37. There's 30 degrees in each chart, so 1.37 is within 5 degrees of 28.37. But it's going to be affecting 28.37 over here. It's right here across the boundary, but it reaches across and affects the house. It aspects this house of income and friends. And again, it owns the house of one's own initiatives. So Saturn, though weak, would seem to give income from the masses, as Saturn represents the masses. Now Rahu and Ketu are two planets that are not recognized by Western astrology. They are the north and the south nodes of the moon. They are disruptive troublemakers. Rahu is the planet of ambition, and placed in the 7th house on the most effective point, can give rise to an overly ambitious marriage partner. Ketu in the 1st house can make one a spiritual person, withdrawn, sometimes even shy in nature. It's a retreating planet. What is important to note here is that Rahu and Ketu are both not only on the most effective point, but they are debilitated to boot. Rahu and Ketu cast aspects on the 1st house of self, the 3rd house of one's own initiatives, the 5th house of children, 7th house of marriage and relationships, the 9th house of good luck, and the 11th house of income and friends. In Vedic astrology, we'd say this person has 6 houses on fire. This would give enormous challenges in life, despite all the boons and gains. Both Rahu and Ketu, troublemaking planets from the get-go, smack dab on the most effective point. Rahu governs fears, phobias, death-like experiences. Ketu governs setbacks and disappointments. This individual's life, despite its enormous gifts, would be very, very difficult. However, the strength of the other very well-placed planets give her what we call protective cover, the ability to weather the vicissitudes gracefully and to simply carry on. Now, when I look at a chart, I look for how many times an indication appears. Here we can safely say this individual is wealthy. But how wealthy? 1 million? 10 million? 100 million? 1 billion? It's a very good question. Wealthy is a vague and relative term. What I look at is how many times the significations of money in the bank, investment status, and real estate occur in this chart. Over and over we see these combining and aspecting each other. So I would place this individual on the high side of wealthy. Now, who do you think this individual might be? Put your best guess below, and we'll see you in the next episode of Ask Me Anything Vedic Astrology. This is Lila. Till next time, over and out.